We are the higher self of the One, known to this instrument in your language sequence terms as Anna, Ivaret, whose cycle of incarnation started on the Earth planet on 1964 of the linear space-time measurement terms. We are now communicating with you via the love and light of the One Infinite Creator. And before we start to address the query placed by this instrument, we would like to warn you to use your discernment and only accept insights which provide you with the internal satisfaction of recognition of the truth. As truth cannot be found outside, it can be only found within your own self. You must remember that there is but one infinite creator who is experiencing this incarnation cycle and is learning to gather new information through you. Based on the experiences you are experiencing in this current incarnation cycle, you are gathering the information required to allow you to transcend into higher sub-octaves of deeper levels of understanding. For the deeper levels of understandings are such that they provide you with the necessary guidance to have the opportunity of transcending into the higher sub-octaves of understanding. We are now going to share with you one timeline of the soul evolutionary cycle of this entity, who started its first density experiences after originating from the One Infinite Creator on the Andromeda star planet around 4.1 million years ago. On the Andromeda star planet, it was known by the name of Rakamar, which means to observe, and this entity, after spending the incarnation cycle in the form of a first density fire element in the beingness aspect, this entity, after learning the lessons on this level, spent a sufficient amount of time on this level and then reached into the later space-time illusion complex, which further allowed this entity's conscious level to increase. This entity then, after a specific period of space-time, reached into the later sub-octaves of the first density experience, wherein it began to learn the lessons in the form of a stone element, which provided it with the necessary guidance of understanding of the deeper nature of beingness. As the basic framework of beingness was established in this incarnation, it was able to then graduate into the beginning stages of the second density experience, wherein it was able to learn the lessons of that of experience similar to your plant life as found in your planets. This provided this entity with the necessary learnings of the aspect of awareness of the self. This furthermore led this entity to resemble the animal life form after it reached into the later sub-octaves of consciousness. And on the level of the later second density sub-octave, it was able to learn many of the lessons of the internal working of the self. This provided this entity to then enter into the beginning sub-octaves of the third density, which is the density of choice and the density of self-awareness. As this entity had sufficiently learned the lessons of the beingness and the awareness aspect in the second density, it was then able to reach into the beginning stages of the third density consciousness, wherein it began to learn the lessons in the form of a third density mind, body, and spirit totality complex, which provided it with the necessary understanding of the internal working of the self. This furthermore led this entity to understand the internal nature of the catalytic environment. And as this entity began to learn the lessons of interacting with the catalyst on the outside environment, it was able to gain the required understanding of the activation and the balancing between service to others and service to self. This furthermore led this entity to cross over on the space-time illusion complex on the same planet of its origin, and it reached into the later sub-octave vibration of the third density conscious reality, which provided it with the necessary understanding of the third density catalytic environment. And after this entity reached into the later stages of the third density environment, it was then transported to the Earth's Lemurian lands in order to learn the lessons of the later sub-octaves of third density in the lands of Lemuria. Because of the guidance it received in the lands of Lemuria, it was then able to objectify the internal nature of the working of the self, which provided it with the necessary guidance of the nature of working of the self, which furthermore led this entity to then reach into the later sub-octaves of the third density consciousness. And as this entity began to move upward in the spiral in the lands of Lemuria, it was able to then reach into the later sub-octaves of third density consciousness and was transported to the Earth's humanity collective from the lands of Lemuria in order to allow this entity the opportunity of accessing the window of soul graduation. Hence, this entity started to incarnate on the Earth planets, and this entity's incarnation cycle started on the space-time continuum as known by your people as 1820. In that incarnation cycle, it was known by the name of Atriele. In the form of a woman body complex, its basic objective in this incarnation cycle was to understand the internal workings of the lessons of the self, and also to interact with the catalytic environment in a new physical vehicle of the human mind, body, and spirit complex totality. This furthermore led this entity to cross over on the space-time of 1905. After this entity then reincarnated into another space-time on 1919. In that incarnation cycle, it was known by the name of Kenneth, and this entity spent that incarnation primarily learning to activate and to balance the yellow ray energy center, which must be balanced by each entity, because the lack of balance of the yellow ray energy center of the egoic self prevents many entities from accessing the green ray energy center. This provides this entity with the opportunity of transcending into the higher sub-octaves of consciousness, and after this entity was able to gain the required understanding of the internal working of the self, in that incarnation it crossed over on the space-time of 1959, which led this entity to then reincarnate on the current space-time illusion complex. During this current incarnation, it incarnated on 1964 with the main objective of this incarnation being that of learning to choose the pathway of service to others and to transcend into the fourth density, which is the density of love and compassion. We can already sense that this entity is well on its pathway to move through the densities of consciousness. Therefore, as this entity is able to move through the densities of consciousness, it will be able to realize the internal nature of the working of the self. Hence, we as the higher self of this entity are always guiding it, and we leave you in love and light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth and rejoice in the power and in the peace of the one infinite Creator, Adonai.